Margaret Thatcher. Savior? Destroyer? Whatever your view is, there's just no denying she was one of the most consequential and, controversial leaders of the 20th century. Her time in power wasn't just another political term, it was a revolution. A revolution that completely changed Britain. And honestly, if you want to understand the country today, you've got to understand what she did. And this quote right here, it's the key. It's the key to understanding everything that came next. She wasn't a leader looking for some comfortable middle ground. Nope. She showed up with a powerful, totally uncompromising ideology, and she was ready to reshape a nation based on her convictions.
Look, it's so easy to get lost in all the strong opinions and the mythology that surrounds her. So in this explainer, we're going to try to cut through all that noise. We're going to look at the crisis she inherited, the radical ideas she brought to the table, and the actual policies that created the Britain we know today. All right, so here's our roadmap. First, we're going to set the scene with the winter of discontent. That's the national crisis that really paved the way for her. Then we'll define Thatcherism itself. After that, we'll see the theory get put into practice with her economic revolution, check out the social conflict that caused, and finally, we'll try to get our heads around her deeply divided legacy. Okay, so to really get Thatcher, you first have to understand the Britain she was walking into. The 1970s, well, they were a time of deep crisis. A time when it really felt like the entire country was just grinding to a halt.
Just think about that phrase, the sick man of Europe. This wasn't just some catchy headline. It really captured a genuine feeling of national decline. It felt like the way things had been run since the war had totally failed, and Britain was just falling behind its neighbors in pretty much every way.
And here are the symptoms of that sickness. You had crippling inflation just eating away at people's savings. You had incredibly powerful trade unions that could bring the whole country to a standstill with strikes. Taxes were high, and these huge state-owned industries, we're talking everything from phones to airlines, were seen as bloated and inefficient. All this chaos created a real hunger for a new direction, for someone, anyone, to come in and just fix it.
And that new direction, it came in the form of a pretty radical new ideology. This wasn't just a handful of new policies. It was a totally different way of thinking about the government, the economy, the whole shebang. And it became known, of course, as Thatcherism.
So what is it?
Well, at its heart, Thatcherism is this exact blend you see here. It's taking free market capitalism and mixing it with a strong, traditional, and very nationalist vision for the country. This was a complete and total rejection of the political consensus that had run Britain for decades.
So let's break that down. The core ideas were actually pretty simple, but boy were they revolutionary. First, unleash the free market by slashing regulations. Second, you had to tackle inflation above everything else, and the way to do that was to control the money supply. That's an idea called monetarism. Third, shrink the government's role in daily life. Fourth, and this was a huge one, privatization. Sell off those massive state companies. And finally, project strength on the world stage.
Okay, so we've got the ideas. Now we get to the action. Because this wasn't just talk. The Thatcher government launched a full-blown economic revolution, putting these principles into practice with policies that would literally change the landscape of the country.
This slide just perfectly sums up one of the biggest changes, privatization. Look at these names: British Telecom, British Airways, British Gas. These were household names, and before Thatcher, the government owned all of them. Her belief was that if you sold them to the private sector, it would force them to be more efficient, more innovative, and actually care about their customers.
Another huge central goal was to break the power of the trade unions, which many saw as holding the country hostage. And the impact? It was dramatic. Through a combination of new laws and, direct confrontation, union membership just plummeted, as you can see, falling by millions during her years in office. So what's with this number, 9 million? Well, it represents the creation of something Thatcher famously called a share-owning democracy. As all those state industries were sold off, regular people were actually encouraged to buy shares, and by 1990, the number of individual shareholders in the country had tripled, going from 3 million to 9 million. The idea was to give more people a direct stake in the capitalist system.
But a revolution like this, it doesn't happen quietly. These massive changes created enormous social upheaval and conflict. It really paints a picture of a nation that was being transformed for sure, but also a nation that was kind of at war with itself.
This timeline really highlights the key flashpoints of her time as Prime Minister. In 1982, you have the Falklands War, and winning that hugely boosted her popularity, cementing that Iron Lady image.
But then, just 2 years later, came one of the most bitter, brutal industrial disputes in British history, the miners' strike, an event that would tear whole communities apart. And this quote, wow. She delivered this during the miners' strike, and it is just stunning. It tells you exactly how the government saw the striking miners, not as opponents in a dispute, but as an enemy within. This kind of language framed the whole thing as this fundamental battle for the very soul of the country.
And this number, this represents the human cost of that battle and the wider deindustrialization that was happening. After the miners were defeated, coal pits across the country were shut down. Over 180,000 jobs were lost in that one industry alone, absolutely devastating entire communities that had been built around those mines for generations.
So, decades later, what's the final verdict? The truth is, the legacy of Thatcherism is still one of the most fiercely debated topics in Britain. It isn't a simple story of success or failure. It's the story of a nation that was permanently divided by her time in charge. This table does a pretty good job of summarizing the two sides of the coin. Her supporters will point out that she tamed inflation, broke the power of disruptive unions, unleashed a wave of entrepreneurship, and really put Britain back on the world stage. But critics will fire back that all of this came at a terrible price: a growing gap between the rich South and the deindustrialized North, skyrocketing inequality, the destruction of communities, and a chipping away at the welfare state.
At the end of the day, this is the real takeaway. You just can't understand modern Britain, its economy, its politics, its social divides, without understanding those 11 years that Margaret Thatcher was in power. The changes she made weren't temporary. They were foundational. They're still with us. And that leaves us with a final question to chew on. The battle she fought really set the stage for the debates we are still having right now, about the role of the state, about the power of the market, and about what kind of society we actually want to be. It seems the ghost of Thatcherism still haunts British politics today,